This is the Bible Show. Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Bible Show. My name is Sam. Joining me is Will, and Will has an announcement for us today.
Yeah, we know we plugged the dailies a couple weeks back, and we just want to give you a date that those will release. They will release this coming Monday on November 3rd, so we'd love if you guys check that out. And again, if you don't remember that announcement, we will be releasing shorter episodes on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Each and every week, you'll still get the long form on Wednesday. But we're excited just to put out more stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, it's great. So we're going to start that by going into the Sermon on the Mount, give people a little bit of a break from the Old Testament and what we're talking about. And then we're going to do a 4 to 5 week series on Advent, kind of focusing on kind of Christmas themes and the miracle of the incarnation. And then we'll return and finish the Sermon on the Mount after that is done. But we're really excited about that. We hope you check it out. I hope you enjoy it. Share, like, and subscribe on those videos to help those catch some momentum. But today we are going into a new series. We finished up Genesis after
Finally, like 45 weeks?
a lot of weeks, and now we're moving into, you already know from the title of this episode, but Exodus. So we're just going to continue right along. And so we're in Exodus 1 today. And a little bit of the background of Exodus. Like, you finished the story of Joseph, and what about Joseph stands out when you read it with an eye toward what God is doing? Like, what stands out most for you in the life of Joseph, the way God ordains it?
Just that God ordained all of that perfectly for good. Mm-hmm. It all seemed like evil in the moment.
Yeah, and for me, to that point, I would say that the story of Joseph is almost like train tracks right next to Jesus, where all the details line up and all the things that are happening. And you get the impression like God is telling this story with an eye toward Jesus, right?
The future.
It's like a shadow of what's to come. Then you get to Moses, which is where we're picking up. Exodus is going to be telling you the story of Moses and how he's raised up to deliver the people from the slavery that they will be in. And one of the things that the New Testament actually makes crystal clear is that the story of Moses and the writings of Moses, because he'll write the 5 books of the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that all of this is pointing you to Jesus. And like, so when we'll be walking through the story of Moses and all of the coming chapters, and we'll be talking about how, do you notice how this is like Jesus? The patterns are there, like God and his sovereignty is clearly pointing us to the gospel, even in the stories of the Old Testament. But then you jump into the New Testament and you hear Jesus say things like this in John 5:46 and 47. He says, if you believed Moses, right? So he's going like the earliest books you can get in the Old Testament. And he's like, if you believed him, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. And you're like,
That's wild.
okay, I've read Genesis. Like, it promises the seed of the woman will crush the head of the snake. I get it. But like, when you say that the Torah is all about you,
What do you mean?
what? And what we're examining, like when you see Jesus all over the story of Jacob and Jesus all over the story of Abraham and Jesus all over the patterns that are established in Joseph, and you're going to see probably even more so in the life of Moses, what he's saying is all of those patterns that reveal the character of God and how God brings deliverance to his people, all that stuff was just whetting your appetite for a deliverer and a savior that's going to be way better than those guys. And so even after his resurrection, when Jesus is walking around with the Emmaus disciples on the road to Emmaus,
Yeah.
he says this, it says this in Luke's Gospel 24, verse 27, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning what? Himself.
That's cool.
Whoa. So like beginning with Moses, Genesis 1:1, he's like, that's me, that's me, that's me. Oh, the patriarchs, yeah, me. The law, me. Prophets, me, there I am, this is me. And he's saying that every bit of the Old Testament is written about him. And so when we come into new stories like this, like they don't jump off the page at you until you see them. And when you see them, you're like, oh my goodness, how could you miss that? But that's one of the things I want us to be mining for as we go into the story of Exodus. How is this pointing us to the gospel of Jesus and the person of Jesus? Because there's going to be one who's far greater than Moses, who comes on a mission to deliver his people.
And I love the response of those guys on the road to Emmaus, right? After they heard that, like their hearts were on fire. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's our hope and goal for this. It's not just to take in knowledge, but it's to say like, wow, look how beautiful Jesus is, and spread that.
Yeah. And when you stop, what does that mean that God is preaching the story of Jesus in all of these ancient, narratives? It's that God is so excited about your salvation and what Jesus is coming to do for his people, that it's like he drops the same golden thread, the beautiful punchline, the meat of the narrative. It's all about him, which means that God is so excited about your redemption that he colors all of redemptive history with this story. That's cool. That shows the heart of God, not just for Jesus, but for Jesus's mission to redeem you. And so let's jump right into Exodus chapter 1. And this kind of like, it's like God is hitting the fast forward button here, because it's like, all right, when Joseph comes, the family comes, and then boom, all of a sudden we're going to jump to slavery in 400 years, just get, and it says, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, which interesting. Let's see both names there again, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. They're all out of order here. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher, all descendants of Jacob, were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. And so when you hear 70 persons, is that more or less than you would have expected?
More.
Okay.
I mean, I was behind all Genesis and keeping up with the time clock. Every episode, I was like, how old are these guys? Now Benjamin has kids. Like,
yeah,
so I was all confused. So that number seems big to me.
So if you take this is almost certainly measuring just the men that are represented here. So there's going to be 70 men, because you'll see that again and again in the scripture, the feeding of the 5,000, not including women and children. When they come out of Egypt through the Red Sea, there were 600,000 men, not including women and children. Like, it makes those notes. So the 70 men, I think, are probably all men, and I'll tell you why I think that.
Like 70 households?
In a sense, yeah, because the men are going to head these households. But there's Jacob's 12 sons, so now we're at 13, 50 grandsons, which means you're at 63, not including Manasseh and Ephraim. Now you're at 65 men. So if there's 70 people in all, that makes rooms for 5 other women that are beyond the numbers that were given in Genesis 46.
Okay.
I'm guessing they picked up 5 males along the way after Genesis 46 that are being counted here, because I don't think it's just 5 women. That would be
crazy disproportional.
Yeah, they lost a lot of women.
Ground, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's what's going on here. We can't be sure, but I think that's a safe guess. It says, then Joseph died. And so the great patriarch that we were reading about, and at the end of Genesis, he died. He was the one that was Israel's safety blanket, right? Like, he was the one who had the connection with Pharaoh. All the favor of Egypt was being poured out on Israel because Joseph was there governing as the number 2 person all over Egypt. But now he's gone. And all his brothers and all that generation die. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. What jumps into your mind when you hear that language?
Genesis
1:28. Cultural, like, it's called the cultural mandate, right? God comes to Adam, and what is the command? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And so here they are. They're in Egypt, and all of a sudden their numbers just start exploding, right? They're being faithful to God's command, that had been passed down. You don't have a Torah, you don't have the law of Moses, but there are some commands that they did get, and one of them is be fruitful and multiply. If you're the people of God, that's what we do. And the other one is, if you want to be part of my people group, you must be circumcised, right? So we know, one, that they're fruitful and they're multiplying, but even after 4 centuries, even after the bitter slavery and everything else, this is what we're told in Joshua 5:5, that all people that came out of Egypt had been circumcised. That means that for 400 years,
they were still faithfully circumcising.
They're holding on to this covenant. And by the way, Exodus 12:48 says that any foreigner that wants to participate in the Passover with them has to be circumcised. So if you were going to be a part of the family of God, the people of Israel at that time, even after all those years of slavery, you had to be circumcised. And Israel was faithfully circumcising its people. Now, hang on to that, because that's going to be a big deal when we get to Exodus chapter 2. It's going to be hard to say Exodus instead of Genesis after all this time.
And it's interesting that, is this the first time that now Israel's not correlated with just a family, but now it's like the whole people group.
Yeah.
It's the people of Israel, because all the relatives are dead.
Yeah, Jacob's gone.
So it's not sons of Israel anymore, it's the people of Israel, which I think is interesting.
These are the people. And remember, Jacob is the person, the scoundrel. Israel is more the covenantal name you see come in. And so Israel here is going to be the people of God. That's the idea, right? And so when you get to Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, it will tell us that when they come out of Israel, and I do want to do this because skeptics bring this up a lot. You know, you start with 70, let's say, men, but it tells us in Exodus 12:37 that when they came out, 600,000 men on foot came out and left with them. So in 400 years, you go from 70 people to 600,000. Does that sound possible? Does that sound good to you?
It doesn't sound crazy to me, but I'm not a big numbers guy.
Okay, well, I'm a numbers guy, and that sounds wild to me. So I figured out what would have to happen, because a lot of people are like, that's just not possible. You can't go from 70 to 600,000.
Were they having 20 kids?
Century. You would only need a birth rate of about 3.6 kids per woman to reach that. Like if the average woman had 3.6 kids, you'd have 850,000 men in 400 years.
That's not crazy.
That's not crazy at all. No. In fact, like if you go to the African continent today, where Egypt is, guess what the birth rate is per woman? 4.16. So they would have exceeded the numbers that would be necessary to grow that fast. They do that today in modern day Africa. And just because I'm an absolute nerd and this has nothing to do with the Bible, guess what the average fertility rate was in the 18th century in America during the Great Awakening?
4.12.
They were having between 7 and 10 kids through that whole season. Can you imagine having 7 to 10 kids?
No, I could barely imagine my 2 today.
Yeah, you were up all night with puking kids.
Yes.
So multiply that. 7 to 10 kids. Here's dumb, nerdy trivia moment. Our first 5 presidents, guess how many siblings? George Washington, 9. John Adams, 6. Thomas Jefferson, 10. James Madison, 12. James Monroe, 8. So our first 5 presidents, like the average household is about 10 kids. You get to Benjamin Franklin, he's got 16 siblings. So like that era, they had tons of kids. And if the Israelites were doing that, I mean, the number would be absolutely astronomical, how many we would have. But 600,000, totally doable. That's nothing to be nervous about when you hear that. So verse 8, they're growing leaps and bounds, right? Well, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now, what does that mean?
No favor anymore.
That's right. Okay, yeah, Joseph rescued Egypt. We owe a debt of gratitude to Joseph and his descendants because they rescued us from famine. Well, a new guy comes and he's like, Joseph who?
Yeah.
And guess what? All the favor that you were counting on, it's like a what have you done for me lately? All that is gone. And it says he said to his people, hear that, his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So a couple of things to think about that we never pause and like imagine this.
Okay.
Joseph comes down, Jacob comes down, they're shepherds, there's 70 of them. They die. It's not like the next year this new king comes along who's like going to throw them into terrible slavery. Their relatives enjoy that. Their descendants enjoy that for an awful long time. And how do we know that? Because this Pharaoh is saying Israel is too many. They're too mighty. Like they're actually a geopolitical threat to us. They might join our enemies. They would produce a massive army that we would have to be worried about. Are you worried about 70 men if you're Egypt? No. Like you could walk through how many generations, just doubling the population you'd have to go through before you would really have to start worrying. Like if their population doubled every generation, every 25 years, you go from 70 to 140, 280, 560. We're like, I'm still not worried if I'm Egypt. Like you have to go multiple generations before you're like, whoa, we're in the tens of thousands. We're in the hundreds of thousands. Before you would be like, this is a threat. And so we're talking at least a century before they start reaching any numbers that would be like, this is alarming. So they have years where they're in mild slavery, where it's like, yeah, you belong to Pharaoh and you're taking care of his shepherds, but it's not like you're being whipped.
It's not the oppressive one that it turns into.
And you've got your ability to move around the land. You've got your household. You have a lot of freedom. But when this new king comes about, it's like, oh no, you're not going to take care just of our herds and flocks anymore. You're not going to get the Cush slavery. We're going to deal with you. We're going to make your slavery bitter. It's going to be hard. You're not getting the Cush life. We don't owe that to you anymore. And so some point in that 400 years, which I think it's not immediate, obviously, everything intensifies. And there's a couple of options for that where you see Egypt really change its leadership dynamics. One of them is when you remember how when Joseph is selling grain to the world, you have all these foreigners coming to buy grain. Well, they settle there. And they settle all through the northern region, and you have something called the Hyksos revolution that happens about 200 years after Joseph, where you have the Hyksos kingdom, which is foreigners, Canaanites, and everybody else that comes, that overthrow the Egyptians and seize power. And so some people are like, maybe that's the new ones, right? Maybe it's the Hyksos. They're like, Joseph, what? We don't care who he was. We've got power now, and we're going to rule it. The other option where you get a new kingdom, and it's actually the beginning of what Egyptologists call the New Kingdom period, ironically, is when you have two pharaohs, Kamos and Amos, who come back to the north and overthrow those Hyksos people, right? Now they would have absolutely no idea of Joseph. Like, it's been so cycled through, like they would have no idea. But the interesting thing is those pharaohs start talking about, we're not going to allow you to have kids, which is interesting. Like in their own writings, this is what Kamo says. The mistresses of Avaris, which is the home birthplace, the headquarters, of Joseph. The mistresses of Avaris shall not conceive. Like, what? Like, we're gonna stop them from having kids. There's another one who's a soldier serving under him who says, when the town of Avaris was besieged, I fought bravely. My captives were given to me as slaves. Another victory over Atta. Pharaoh Amos gave all his people as booty. And so in this transition, you have a pharaoh who's saying, we're not going to allow them to have kids, right? Mistresses, like the women are not going to be able to have kids. And we're going to make all of them, we're going to reduce all of them to slavery. So it's an interesting theory, could be this time period. But again, that's centuries into this. So if you do the doubling thing, like, okay, Hyksos is after 2 centuries. If you do the doubling every 25 years, there would be 17,920 to grow from 70. You'd have 7. That's alarming, right? Mm-hmm. If it's 3 centuries, you're climbing up to 286,000 if they double every 25 years. In either of those two cases, I could see, okay, that would be alarming to have that many men that are not Egyptians that are ready to go, that could join our enemies and overthrow us. And by the way, one of the other things that Pharaoh Kamos writes about is the people of the north are conspiring with the Nubians to the south to overthrow us. Like that, those are in his records. He was very paranoid that the people of the north were conspiring with foreigners, which bears out here in the Bible too. Total conjecture, but it's an interesting theory to me. All right, so in verse 11, any questions on that? Did that make sense?
No, that made sense. It is one where the Bible's pretty quick and doesn't give you a lot of details here, so you are left either saying just like, whatever, or just like, okay, these are the options. We're not concrete on any of them, but it is interesting to be like, oh yeah, all of a sudden a new king pops up and there's tons of people in his land that he doesn't trust.
Yeah.
I don't agree with what he does, but it makes sense from running his kingdom.
Yeah. I mean, if you're this is all I care about, like that makes sense. You're trying to make sure that Egypt takes control of the north again. You're a threat to that. I'm going to put you down. And so then you get to verse 11, and this is one of these things where, like, in the popular culture, like, you always see the slavery the same way, whether it's in, the Prince of Egypt or the Charlton Heston movie. Like, what are they doing? What are the slaves always portrayed as doing?
Building pyramids?
Yeah, they're not. Like, that's just not. So the last pyramid, the real pyramid, right, is Pepi II. It was built in Saqqara around 2200 BC. That's one of the last pyramids that was built. The last, except for one that doesn't really count. That means that this pyramid would have been built before Abraham.
Oh, wow.
Would have been built 800 years before Moses shows up on the scene. So they're not building pyramids. The pyramids stopped, and then they built like tombs, ordinary structures for tombs. But anyway, this is what's interesting. It says they set before them taskmasters to afflict them with heavy burdens. So now for the first time, notice what this means. Did they have taskmasters before in their slavery?
No.
No, it's like for the first time, it's like we need people to watch over them every moment of every day. Because before that, they kind of got their own freedom. They're doing their own thing. Hey, as long as you take care of the flocks, great. But now it's like, no. We need people watching them with whips and, taking them to task to afflict them with heavy burdens. And then it says this. This tells us what they were doing in Egypt. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. Now, what are store cities? It's not talking about Publix, by the way. Like we're
like
building
storage.
Stores. It's storage. It's the storage of grain. And the reason why you need that, particularly as we're getting into the 18th dynasty when Moses lives, is all of a sudden Egypt is in constant conflict with groups to the north like the Hittites. And so you're coming from down south, Thebes or other places, and you're headed up, your army's going up. You get to Goshen, which is the last place in the northeast of Egypt. Oh. And it's like, we need massive depots of food because our armies are going to be on their way up there. They're going to need
refill supplies.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so that's what you would expect. And so all that region, you see all of a sudden storage compounds are all over those cities, and they're all built right during this particular time period. So more archaeological nerdy stuff. Pithom, we know where that city was. An archaeological team uncovers it. What would you expect to find in a storage city?
Big empty warehouses.
Warehouses, silos, storage caves. Guess what they find? A relatively large silo constructed of mud bricks. They also found evidence of, quote, a larger group of people who lived in small huts with very thin walls. Slave class. And their report added that the site was just suddenly abandoned for unknown reasons between the reign of Thutmose III and Ramses II. Guess when Moses lives? Right then. Can you imagine a reason why a city that is populated with all of these slave quarters just all of a sudden is emptied?
That would be weird.
That like an exodus or something happened, right? So all of these, the conditions they find in Pithom are interesting. Ramses is even cooler, right? So Ramses is built upon Avaris. This is where Joseph is. This is where Moses' home base is. I'm convinced. But it's the Manfred Bitek, who's an archaeologist that comes from the University of Vienna. He's not a believer, but this is what he found in his report. He says they found small brick-lined storage caves under the floor. His excavations exposed a massive, quote, storage compound. And during the 18th dynasty, the western part of Avaris had a large number of silos, magazines that are evidence of grain stockpiling. And then he says they found at least 30 grain silos on the south side of the city. Now, listen to what this archaeologist he's not commenting on the Bible at all.
Yeah, no
he would
agenda.
probably disagree and say, well, I'm not sure we could say that. But listen to what he says. This amenity, these storage compounds, was used to store enormous quantities of grain and probably other food stuff for a considerable number of people. It could have been a makeshift military facility for supplying troops. So what you have this unbelieving archaeologist saying is, yeah, that city that they this is a storage city that would have had so much storage capacity that could have taken care of their whole army. Well, that fits like a glove. This is exactly what we're told, that it would be a storage city. And so now the Israelites they're slaves in times of blessing, and now they've got taskmasters that are putting them down. Now, is slavery, when you think of slavery, you would say that this is an awful thing. Yes. That it's always bad. And yet in the New Testament, here's something that's weird. The Bible comes and says, when you come to Christ, what's your identity?
You're a slave to Christ.
You're a slave. How do you feel about that? Like, parse that out in your brain. What do you think about that? You're a slave to Christ. Here's some other ones. You're a slave of righteousness. You're a slave of God. You're a bondservant of the Lord. Like, these are things that the New Testament says you lose your right to determine your future, essentially, when you come to Christ. You're a slave. You do his bidding. You good with that?
Yeah, it makes sense because it's God.
Yep.
I mean, in the end, he's the master of all of us, whether we bow the knee to him or not. Like, he's in control of all things. So we can fool ourselves and say that I'm not a slave to him. But, like, he's got your last breath on the calendar, whether you believe in him or not. So in the end, you are a slave to him. But I think
It's a good point.
I think in the end, like, your slavery depends on who your master is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you have a good master, then you're not too worried about being a slave. If you have a master like God who's compassionate and cares about you and loves you and is sovereignly ordaining all things for his glory and your good, then you're like,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, when we think of freedom, we think of like, I have control. I get to determine my own fate. But in the reality of things, like you were talking about, when you peel it all back, how much of your life are you actually in control of?
Becoming less and less as I get older.
You realize it's less and less and less. Like, you don't control every aspect of your health. You don't control whether the person in oncoming traffic swerves over. You don't control much of it. You don't control the weather. You don't control, whether wars go on. Like, you really are at the mercy of a lot of stuff that's outside of yourself. And so, like, you can go through this life with all of your affection saying, an addiction or whatever. You're a slave to it. You're a slave to whatever you're serving as the highest cause of your life. You just are. Like, if money is your greatest thing that your life is defined by, guess what? You are a slave to it. If it's fame, if it's whatever, you're a slave to it. God comes and says, you're going to give your heart to something. You're going to bow the knee to something. Every human being is made to worship and to bow the knee to something. Something in their life they're yielding to. And he's like, I'm the only one that is serving your interests forever. Bow the knee to me and let me take care of you. Because we serve a God who incidentally, like when you get to, Philippians 2, who says that the God, the great master, the one with all the authority, did what? He set it all aside, came in, identified as a slave to serve our interests and the Lord's interests and to lift us up. It's kind of wild. Or Jesus, and one of my favorite quotations from Jesus in Matthew 11 says this, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke, there is a yoke to carry. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And by the way, I'm the one who's carrying the other side of that, and I carry the labor and the weight. Just walk with me. Like, that is what we're invited into. And I love this, and I'll finish on this point. But 1 Corinthians 7, verse 22 captures this so well. He says, for he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freeman of the Lord. What does that mean? If you came as a slave, you're free, right? Likewise, he who is free when called is a bondservant of Christ. Like, you set aside your freedom to become a slave. You give away your slavery to become free. There's that dynamic no matter what you're doing. Like, there's some aspect in which you are yoking yourself to him. You're becoming voluntarily a slave to his agenda. And at the same time, what happens when you become a slave to him? For the first time in your life, you're free. Now, all of a sudden, I don't have to determine my identity. I don't have to worry about, being in charge of controlling everything in the universe. I get to recognize I'm not, but the one who does control it loves me to pieces and would go to a cross. And man, if he is for me, what can be against me? Like, it's the first time in your life that you are actually free is when you say, I'm absolutely out of control. I cannot determine my tomorrow. I'm giving it to you, and I'm including myself as a slave. And now for the first time, it's like you become a child in a household, right? Like, my kids, they're under my authority, and yet it's the freest place they could be because I love them and I'm caring for them.
Yeah.
That's what we're invited into. And so there is this weird dynamic where they're facing bitter slavery, but their slavery's bitter because their master is evil. Our master's pretty wonderful.
And I think the litmus test of defining who my master is at different stages in life, because if we're honest, this gets all janky sometimes, even in all of our lives. Like, where am I spending my time, my talent, and my treasure? Like, three very real things that I can track. Like, I have data for how I spend my time. Like, Will, get out your calendar. What have you done this past month to show that God's your master?
Yeah.
Hey, if I look at what God's given me and my gifts and my abilities, like, how am I using those? And the last one, treasure, is obviously probably the easiest one to point out in all of our lives.
Yeah.
Because money is that slippery slope one.
Yeah, and you can get mastered again and again and again. It's kind of those, you're looking at those, kind of taking inventory. It's always the smelling salt that's good to be like, you know, let me step back. What am I serving with my life? Like, what is my master right now? Because if it's not God, it doesn't care back. Yeah. It's not serving you back. So let those bad false masters go and become a slave of the only one that gives you freedom. Yeah. You know, right? There was a study that was done, and I always loved this because I think as a headmaster, this was always something when I was the headmaster of a school in previous life.
You threw this at people a lot?
This was fascinating because they did a study where they took kids and they went out into an open field that didn't have fences or anything. It was a huge open field, and they said, go play. And the kids just huddled really close to the teachers, and they didn't wander. But then they went out the field, and with a good bit of distance, they installed fences, right, that went around the school. And then all of a sudden, the kids were everywhere. Why?
Because the fences made them feel safe, gave them a good boundary.
That's right. The fences made them feel safe, and it gave them freedom to know what they were allowed to do. And in the same way, when God calls you to be a slave of righteousness, what does that do? Like, I mean, think about sexuality. This just took a weird turn, but I wasn't planning on going there. But think about this. Like, God comes and says, this is a beautiful thing. Enjoy it. Here's the boundaries. And so long as you enjoy it, like all the studies that are done, find that people that are in monogamous relationships that do it the biblical way have the healthiest sex life, the most rewarding sex life. Everything goes best for the people who stay within the perimeters that God has designed. Everyone else ends up in pain and, you know, all kinds of destructive things that come along with it. And God gives us fences not to be like, hey, you can only go here and I'm the master and you're the slave. It's because he's a loving father, and there's real freedom within the parameters that he sets that blesses you and allows you to feel safe and to not be enslaved to all the destruction that comes when you go beyond where you're supposed to. It's just a fascinating experiment. So anyway, verse 12, but the more they were oppressed, right? So the bitter slavery comes on them. They've got the taskmasters now. You know, we can't let them multiply. We're going to drive them into the dirt. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread about. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. And notice all the adjectives here in adverbs. They ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. They made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and all kinds of work in the field. And all the work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. So you feel the animosity between Egyptians and Hebrews growing, right? Yeah. Like now all of a sudden we're gross. And yet they keep growing. Why?
It's a great question. Because most times you think when you're oppressed, you're like, oh, we should stop having babies and bring them into this awful oppression.
Mm-hmm. Do you know where you hear that? It's one of the most bizarre things. Where you hear that is in very wealthy countries. And places where you have the highest rates of prosperity. That's where you hear people say, I can't bring a kid into this hurting world. Do you know the two factors that are the most correlated with high fertility rates? They're counterintuitive, or at least one of them is for sure. High poverty rates are associated with high birth rates. Okay. So the people who are suffering the most, who want the most, who are in shortage the most, those are the ones that have the most kids. The other one is people of faith. And it doesn't have to be Christianity or, you know, whatever. Like, if you have faith that there is something greater than this world, you're going to have more kids. And so if you look the places where there is the greatest fertility right now, where would you guess they are then?
Africa.
They're Niger, in order. Niger, Chad, Somalia, Congo, Central African Republic. Some of the poorest nations on earth, where they're very religious. They're having kids like no tomorrow. Where's the lowest fertility rates?
Probably America and Europe.
There's not a single country in the European Union with a replacement level fertility rate. They're not having babies anymore, and they're the most prosperous, but they're also the most secular. They've walked away from God, and now they're emptying out. So in this case where you see this brutal oppression and they're having tons of more kids, it's because it's telling you, yes, check poverty, it's there. You see that they're suffering, but it also suggests faith. Like they're remaining fruitful and multiplying because they believe that there's something greater to come. They believe in the hope of a future that's given to them and promised to them. So they keep having kids. And this tension between the Egyptians and the Israelites serves only to advance that faith because they're not assimilating. There's no way that a Hebrew who's walking through this, the Egyptians want nothing to do with them. They want nothing to do with the Egyptians. And so what do they have? Our culture. And they're becoming more and more solidified. And the faith that's been handed down from the patriarchs through all those centuries is now solidifying. No, we're a circumcised people. We follow Yahweh. We are the Israelite people, the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's cementing, right? So verse 15, then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, you shall kill him, but if it's a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. What do you think's going on here?
I don't know, the murder of children and escalation. Like, I get how this would solve Pharaoh's problem.
How so?
I mean, if they're having babies and that's the problem, they keep growing stronger, then let's get rid of their children.
And why the men? Like, these are the soldiers. These are the ones who could fight. They're the ones who also procreate. Like, if we take away half the equation, they can't have children. But it's also the men. So these are not threatening peoples anymore, and yet we get to keep the slaves. So another part of this is, who is the seed of the woman going to be? Male or female?
Male.
Male, because it says, the seed of the woman shall crush, and it's he, right? So here you have it. I mean, it's almost a satanic thing where it's like, I know that the Savior is supposed to be the male that comes through these people. And if there's any notion of a deliverer who can take these people out of oppression, if we wipe out the males, then the Savior goes as well. And there's part of me that wonders, this is total conjecture, but there's part of me that wonders if this is like a satanic movement to squash any hope of a Savior or salvation to come.
Because technically one of Jesus' descendants is amongst this people group, right?
His ancestors, for sure. Yeah, in the line of Judah somewhere in this. Okay. So like the Bible comes and at Adam, it's like, could be anyone born of a woman. Then you get to Abraham and it's like, nope, from you, then Isaac, then Jacob, then Judah, and on down the line where the line is preserved. So it's narrowing down, but we know it has to be among these people.
That's interesting. I never thought about that.
So if you're wiping out all the male babies, there's no seed of the woman that's a he, right? And so there is part of me that wonders, like, no matter what, this is satanic evil, that's hostile to life, but it makes you wonder if the demonic realm is looking to subvert any hope of a Savior, which, by the way, when Jesus is born, guess what happens?
Herod kills babies.
That's right. You have another maniacal tyrant who hears the deliverer, let's kill all the baby boys, right? Huh. And so there's that pattern. An interesting thing, Herod, this is interesting to me, Herod is going to say, I want all children killed age 2 and under. Moses has an older brother. Guess how many years older he is?
I mean, he must be 3.
So yeah,
3 or more.
There's one line in the scriptures that talks about how Aaron is 83 when Moses is 80. So he's 3 years older and he survives, which means the decree could have been 2 and under. So you hear an echo going on there. And by the way, let's just pause here for a moment. You have how many years of silence after Joseph until you get to Moses? How many years of silence where they're in oppression or slavery and God has been quiet? 400 years, right? When you get to Jesus, you have another deliverer. You have another maniacal tyrant killing all these babies. How long is the silence between the last prophet of the Old Testament and Jesus?
400 years.
400 years, you see? Like, this pattern that God is establishing is like wink, wink, nod, nod. This is going to be a deliverer, and the things that he does are like a physical reality to what Jesus will do spiritually. But it's just a foretaste of what's going to be a greater deliverer, and the details just start racking up here, which is just fascinating. But these women, Shiphrah and Puah, they're the earliest heroes that I can think of civil disobedience, where it's like Pharaoh says, I want you to kill them. If there's a male born and you're the midwife, you're going to be there at the birth. I want you to kill them. And they're like, they fear God and they, nope,
Say no.
we're not going to do that. How do you feel about that? Like, what's your position on civil disobedience? I throw you on the hot seat so you get in trouble.
This one's crystal clear to me. Like a government, and this is the first government we see, I guess, right? Like the first official.
Yeah, I mean, you got Babel, you have cities and kings and stuff like that.
But this is the first more structured one where, like, when Pharaoh speaks, you must listen.
Correct, yeah.
So this is one where there's, saying, I'm not going to listen to the formal magistrate that says this. I mean, this one's crystal clear to me. Like, the government comes to you and says, you need to start killing babies. Like, I hope we're all like, we're out.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and the New Testament, it makes it crystal clear, like you said, in Acts 5, when verse 29, when the religious leaders are coming to the apostles and they're like, you're not allowed to teach in the name of Jesus anymore. What's their response? Like, oh, okay, well, since the government said it, I guess. No, they say, we must obey God rather than men. And they take the punishment. Like, they're you want to throw us in jail? You want to kill us? You want to do whatever? Like, we are not going to obey you. And that's what these midwives are doing. And when you see this throughout history, like people who stand up against genuine evil and refuse to comply with the government, it's always a slippery slope, right? Like it gets like, when do you do it and when do you not do it? Because the first person who says, I refuse to comply, everybody's like, oh no, the Bible says you're supposed to honor the king and you're supposed to follow them and you're supposed to submit to your authorities. All true. But only if what?
Disobeys God.
If it's calling upon you to disobey God, you may not obey government.
Which is why this is all situational. This is not a carte
Yeah,
blanche.
right.
Don't go from here and be like, well, they said, like, no.
I'm taking up arms. Like,
yeah, like, relax.
Maybe someday. I don't know. I mean, we'd have to think about that situationally. But there's a great guy, this incredible pastor who was in China when China began cracking down on Christian pastors. And this is, I want to say like 2017 or 18, but I remember reading this guy's letter. It was his name.
Fairly recent, by the way. Let's just mention that.
Yeah, this guy's still in prison, by the way. But his name was Wang Yi, and he was a pastor at Early Rain Church. And so they came to him and they said, in China, you have to register your church with the government, make sure that you're preaching, state-sanctioned religion, whatever. So he does an unregistered church, and he says, I'm going to preach the gospel. I'm not going to pull punches on the evils of the communist dictatorship. Like, I'm going to preach it. Super faithful guy. So they arrest him. They take him away from his family. He's basically disappeared him for 9 years. And they heard he was malnourished and all this stuff. But he wrote a letter and released it before going to prison. I remember reading this and being like, this guy's amazing. And Google it, read it. It's courageous. But he says, I accept and respect the Chinese Communist Party's regime as a temporary ruler allowed by God. I also believe that the persecution of the church by the Chinese communist regime is an extremely evil crime. As a pastor of the Christian church, I must sternly and openly blame such sins. My calling also requires me to violate all human laws that violate the Bible and God in a nonviolent form in peace and patience. Christ, my Savior, also asks me, hear this, to joyfully bear all the costs of transgressing evil laws.
Wow.
Could you do that?
Maybe.
And that's what you see in the early church. They were like, mow us down.
Yeah.
I'm not going to obey. I'm not going to bow. I'm not going to walk away from Jesus. It might mean that I go to prison. It might mean that I'm thrown in the Colosseum. It might mean whatever. I'm not going to obey your laws. And it's like, how do you find such incredible courage? This is how he concludes at the bottom of his letter. He says, the Chinese communist regime is full of fear for a church that no longer fears it. There is a higher authority than their authority, and there is a freedom that cannot be held by them, full of Jesus Christ. In other words, you can take my body, you can take my liberties and all the things that I enjoy. You can put me in a prison. You can never take away from me the freedom that I have in Christ. You can't. and I'll never surrender it. I'll never be your slave. I'll never bow the knee to you. I have freedom in him. I'm a slave of his. I'm loyal to his word. I will not comply with evil. So do with me what you want. You'll never take my freedom, even if you throw me in a jail. Like, that's power.
Yeah.
That's power. That's what you saw in the early church. That's what you always see with revivals when they spark in evil places. And that, in the middle of all this persecution in Egypt, you got to think the faithful remnant that really believed in the promises of God, no matter how hard they came down on them, it's like, you can't take away from me the promise that God gave. No matter what you do, no matter how much you slam down and you say you're not going to win, and the odds seem overwhelming, and you have all the army, and you have all the chariots, and you've got all the weapons, you don't win. I've got a promise of God. You're not going to win. I'm going to keep having kids. We're going to win. Because he promised this would happen, how much more do we have? Like, when you look at whatever the world situation is, Christians can despair and be like, oh, we're, whatever. Have you read the promises? You win. There's nothing that's going to take away that liberty. There's nothing that's going to take away that victory. Walk in that and then be obedient. Joyful freedom, willing to take whatever the world has to throw at you, defiantly so. That's fun.
Yeah, Jesus is pretty straightforward about what we're going to face. Like, he's never lied to us and said this is going to be a cushy gig.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, they're going to hate you. They hated me. They're going to persecute you. They persecuted me. Right? Don't fear those that can kill the body. Fear those that can kill the soul.
That's right. That's right. And these midwives are willing to risk everything. Why? Because they fear God more than they fear Pharaoh. And by the way, they trust God with their lives and reputations. And what does he do? He rewards them. That's the next part. Verse 18. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, oh, it's because the Hebrew women, they're not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife comes to them. Are they telling the truth? No, they're lying. Like, we're going to see that later on. Like, it says they allowed the kids to live previously. So, like, they allowed the kids to live.
There's some wordplay here that's working.
But they're lying. But it would be reasonable. If they're having tons of kids, you know this if you've had a big family, with each successive kid, the labor tends to get shorter. Like, this is a proven thing, by the way. I'm not like throwing out, witchcraft. But they're like in the American Journal for the College of Obstetrics and Gynecology or whatever. I researched
really sounds like you know what you're saying.
I researched it. But they found with each successive child, your labor gets shorter. Why? Your body's used to it. It's trained, multiple reasons. And that was true for us. Like, we had Caleb, Jacob, Leah, got shorter each time. Is that true for you?
No.
I've only had 2. You're blowing the trends. I shouldn't have asked.
I do love how these women are named and the Pharaoh's not named. I don't know if that is reading into anything, but I think that's a cool thing for Moses. Like, we know these 2 midwives' names, and we could give 2 cents about who this Pharaoh was, to be honest. Yeah. But these women are worth emulating.
Yeah, I'm like conjecturing, well, maybe it was in the Hyksos. I mean, like, we don't know. This guy's like forgotten essentially into history, but you're right. These 2 women are honored, and their names are cool. I think it's like beauty and magnificence. It's like really honoring names too. All right, so verse 20, so God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. And so Pharaoh can do that. Like, they fear God, and he rewards them for that fear.
Also, they lied straight to Pharaoh's face. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think about that in terms, because I don't understand that kind of power dynamic. Like, you're the foreign midwife who the top dog who's seen as a god with all power told you to do something. You did not do it, at least the way he asked, and you might or might not have lied straight to his face.
Yeah.
Just the courage of these women to protect life is astounding.
Yeah. And that comes again to a conviction that says, look, if we believe that all life is made in the image of God, I would rather you take my life than put that on my hands to be responsible for the death of others. Yeah. Like, that should be a base level conviction in all of us. Like, there are some things worth dying for. that protect your dignity and the dignity of humanity around you. And you should go to every conceivable length to defend the sanctity of life. And these women were literally willing to lay down their life in defense of the sanctity of life. And God comes to them, even though they lied, right? And it's like, my blessing's on you for doing that. Like, you feared me, you protected life, even if you did it that way, blessing upon you.
And there was no other option.
I mean, not a moral one.
Yeah, it's like they're really stuck.
I mean, they could have said no.
Yeah.
And then been killed. But again, like, that plays into, are you trashing your own life? You know, I mean, I guess you could say I'm putting my life in God's hands and do the pietistic thing or, pietistic thing. But if you're honestly with a man that is this evil, do you owe him that opportunity, to defile life? Are you encouraging him to sin by telling him the truth, knowing that it will lead him to murder even more?
Yeah, no.
It's
interesting.
The moral categories that you can get into with this are very interesting. And I mean, you can look at it black and white. They lied, lying's wrong, but it's in a fallen world where the lie prevented an even more egregious sin from happening. So what's the right thing to do? There are books written on this. So then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So he's going to get his way one way or another. And we've talked about this before. What is ironic about the fact that Pharaoh is ordering the Hebrews to be thrown into the waters?
His kingdom's going to be crushed by the waters.
Yeah. A future Pharaoh, right? The next one to come. One of the ones to come. The whole army is going to be thrown into the waters, which is fascinating. And here's one last archaeological string of nuggets. When you go to Avaris and you're looking in the strata, the layer of ruins that dates to around this time period, 50% of the burials at Avaris from this period involve infants. You had high child death rates in Egypt because of just the time period, and technology. But in other spots, it's about 25% is typical of burials or infants. And this place, tons of infant burials. So they're being not just thrown into the Nile, but babies are being killed. They find them. In 1906, there was an archaeologist named Sir Flinders Petrie, I'm guessing on the pronunciation there. But he's going around looking at the ruins of these cities, and he finds infant burial jars that are put in the masonry work of the city. So like they would build the bricks to build the walls or whatever, and inside the bricks, they would put these jars that have infant skeletons in them, where the infant was dead.
And they build the walls out of that?
They put the burial jar inside the walls. In other words, it would be like its own tomb, a place to protect it and honor it, because you can't afford anything else. You don't have materials to build your own tomb, your own pyramid. So they literally would put these infants inside the city walls. And I think they found like 6 or 7 of them at Pithom in the ruins. But the other thing is, when they were looking at the adult burials, should you expect to find at that same time period more men or women in the adult burials?
More women.
Right, because they're killing all the baby boys. So in the adult burials, they're finding 3 women for every 2 men, which is that's statistically significant. So something's going on where infant burials go up, more adults are women than men. And that suggests that for whatever reason, in this particular part of Egypt, at this time period, infants are getting targeted. They're dying disproportionately. Interesting to me. And oh, by the way, there's a guy, a record called the Admonitions of Ipuwer.
Of course.
The Admonitions of Ipuwer. But it refers to the Nile as a sepulcher, which is a tomb, and it says that many were buried in the river. So right during this time period, you also have writings that are talking about the Nile River being a place for the dead, which is just like, I mean, you start putting that together and the historical nuggets are like, wow. But here, this is going to be where when the people cry out to God, which will be where this gets picked up in the next one, you're going to see God bring a deliverer, and the Nile is going to play a big role in defining that he is being set apart to save the people of God.
And just as a plug of all that archaeology stuff, it was resonating with you, or you just want to hear more in deeper depth, we do go have a video on that on our Under the Hood channel. So find Under the Hood, just scroll the videos until you see this, but you can see pictures and go into more depth, because this is an important thing. Like the fact that we can look in the ground and say like, oh, let me read Exodus, and then look into the ground and see, okay, we can see what is happening. It's pretty astounding.
You know, and it's kind of a bummer to end chapter 1 with every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, you know.
Tough one.
Right? But this, again, is actually setting up for us a pattern that you see God do again and again throughout the scripture. So like we talked about, the whole point of the Joseph story that you mentioned was your favorite part of the life of Joseph is you have all this ugliness that God ultimately will harness and then overturn it and make it for good, right? So here you have Pharaoh who's instructing all his people that if a baby is born, I want a male baby, I want you to throw them into the Nile, this really evil thing. The irony is, what does Moses' mother do in the next chapter? She's going to take her male son and
throw him into the Nile.
Huh. And what will God do with the evil schemes of the wicked one? He overthrows them. He turns them on his head. And that command, even though obviously Jochebed is not following the spirit of killing her son, but she's throwing her son into the Nile, and God uses the very prescription of evil to overthrow the schemes of evil. You see that same thing with a cross. When Jesus goes to the cross, you've got to imagine that all of hell is rejoicing. All the demons, the devil that had mocked him on the cross, like just absolutely reveling in the fact that the Son of God is on a cross. And what happens? That becomes the most triumphant thing in all of redemptive history. The cross leads to the empty grave. Death is defeated. Sin has no power because the devil thought he triumphed by that wicked scheme. And this more and more, like when you see it, like train it into your mind and your heart that when evil seems to be advancing, God has a masterful way of making the devil overplay his hand. You know, the devil overplayed his hand with Joseph. Look what happened. The devil overplays his hand here with Moses. Look what happens. The devil overplays his hand with Jesus. Look what happened. The devil might be overplaying his hand in your life right now. Watch what God does to overthrow the wicked schemes of the enemy. He's a master at judo, using the weight of the enemy to overthrow it and throw him on his head. And we, as people of hope who know this God, who know how he works, we've seen it again and again in the scriptures in our own lives, we need to walk with a confidence that no matter what we're facing, God means it for good. He will overthrow it. He will bring about something for his glory and our good, which enables us to go, okay, let me think of all the wicked schemes against me right now. No weapon formed against me
Shall prosper.
Not going to happen. You don't know who my God is. And that's an awesome thing to be able to walk in, that confidence.
Amen.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us in Exodus chapter 1. Join us next time as we get into the birth of Moses and how he rises up and how he tries to do it on his own and how he's going to be this incredible picture that's very similar to Jacob and how God is going to grow him in a lot of ways, just like he grew Jacob. Join us then. God bless.